can never get this right, but I think, okay, now we have started recording. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome in to another episode of Late Night Bitcoin. This is a very special episode of Late Night Bitcoin as we are recording late night for my guest, very early, not very early, but early in the morning for me. This will be released later. So we are recording before the FOMC meeting today, so we will not be discussing the rate hikes, unfortunately. However, we've got a lot of other stuff to talk about. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Late Night Bitcoin. If you're joining us on YouTube, make sure you like and subscribe down below. If you're listening to us on any podcasting platform, please leave a review, share with your friends so we can have these conversations shared with as many plebs as possible. But now, I'm excited to introduce my guest for today, who's becoming very quickly one of my favorite Bitcoin writers in this space, who has a newsletter that if you are not subscribed to, you absolutely need to subscribe to because it's pure signal, no noise, and you enjoy reading it. I'm talking none other than Arsen from the newsletter TLDR. Arsen, thank you so much for taking the time to join me.
Thanks for the intro, Q, and let's talk Bitcoin.
Let's get into it. I will ask you the or I guess I should change it from $1 million to 100 million Satoshi question, which is, when was the first time you ever heard about Bitcoin, and what was your initial reaction?
I hate this question. I don't actually remember. I have no memory. I think it would have been 2017 when I was a student. I think Bitcoin was at 4K, but I'm not sure. That's just what I remember. And I don't remember thinking much except that I missed the train. And, I'm a bit of a degenerate gambler myself. So I do, I'm always on the lookout for, opportunities to make quick money, even though no such thing exists as quick money. And but I do remember thinking that I'm late to Bitcoin, and if somebody would have told me what I know now, that Bitcoin is tiny compared to the some of the other assets class, I would have jumped in already in 2017. But unfortunately, I didn't, and then I rediscovered Bitcoin a few years later.
See, I get why you hate that question, because I think a lot of Bitcoiners, they're like, I heard about it and I should have done something with it. But the reason why I actually love this question is so many non-Bitcoiners and no coiners especially look at us convicted Bitcoiners and they're like, I'm not like you. I'm never going to think about Bitcoin in that way. But what I want to try to show is we were exactly like you. We were as skeptical as you are today at one point in our past, but over time, over added exposure, added research, doing the work and learning about this technology, and then whatever value we had where this technology intersected with it, we eventually became the Bitcoiners that we are today. But don't you just hate the fact that you think back and you're like, oh, I should have. Like, I heard about Bitcoin in 2013, and it was like the age-old story of I wanted to send weed to myself in college. Friend told me about Silk Road, and this is how stupid I was in college. I was like so turned off by the idea of, I gotta go buy this. What is this Bitcoin thing? Like, can't I just put my debit card in and just buy some weed online? Like, I didn't understand what that would have entailed. So my naivety, my youthful ignorance cost me probably millions of dollars, but I digress. You get the price. You get Bitcoin at the price you deserve.
Yeah, was it? Did you say 2013?
Yeah,
that's pretty early. Are we
it
talking?
was Silk Road days.
Are you a whale?
No. I didn't buy like that. That's I heard about Bitcoin, but like I was like trying to send weed to myself in college, and then it was literally, I got to go buy this thing called Bitcoin. No, I don't want to do that. And I like literally found someone who would let me Venmo him to send me weed. Like that's how dumb I was. So No, I did not start buying Bitcoin until around the same time as you, actually. In like 2019 was the first time I ever bought a Bitcoin.
Yeah, I mean, we all have to start somewhere, and we do start as clueless newbies. But I would add a caveat there that because you are a Bitcoiner now, there's something in you. There's like a inherent curiosity. So I wouldn't say that we're just that is some people need more exposure than others, but I think people who do go down the rabbit hole, they are, I would say, truth seekers, and they think from first principles, and you know they're just genuinely curious people. um and yeah, did you manage to buy some with Bitcoin, or did you end up using Venmo?
No, I used Venmo. Like I've thought about it too, and there are two, like, knowing the way my mind worked then and just like reflecting on it. What I would have done is I would have bought more Bitcoin than I would have needed, but because there, like in 2013, there wasn't like a Ledger wallet, or there wasn't Moon wallet or cold cards and stuff like that. Like the holding your own Bitcoin was actually even harder than trying to go and buy Bitcoin. So knowing me and knowing how technologically challenged I am, I probably would have lost all of it. And that would have been even more painful, I think, to like, I'm sitting on 10 Bitcoin somewhere in this computer and I don't know where it is. Like, that to me is more painful than, oh, yeah, I heard about Bitcoin, but I did nothing about it in 2013. My brother's dumber, though. My brother, I think around
Wow.
the same time, 2012, 2013, some kid in his robotics team owed him $20. And the kid offered, instead of giving him $20 cash, I'll give you $100 worth of Bitcoin. And he said no. So my family has told him he needed to move to the other side of the country. He can only come visit us once a month or once a year. And like, other than that, we just absolutely roast him for it.
So your brother is having fun staying poor now.
Very,
But
very much so.
I don't blame you for not understanding. It's such a, like, to even grasp the basics of Bitcoin, you have to unlearn so much. It's such a foreign concept that you actually hold your money and you're responsible for it. It feels like the modern financial system and just everything else around us sort of, it's like there's always a babysitter where you're not fully responsible for your actions, but there's always like some kind of back door that will save you. And just that was a huge, like, lesson for me, because I've lost some Bitcoin because I was careless with it. And but it's just part of the journey. You have to learn that that's how bear assets work. And if somebody can help you out with it, you know it's ultimately, it's not really your asset.
Yeah. Um, let's dive into some of these stories, and full disclosure again for those who are not aware, Arsen is the author, the creator of this newsletter TLDR. All the topics we're going to discuss, he has actually brought up and shared on his newsletter. So if any of these topics intrigue you, I urge you, go and sign up, register, join the TLDR newsletter team. Arsen, how can people, we'll remind them again towards the end, but how can people join the newsletter?
So just go to tldrbtc.com and you'll land on a landing page, and just put your email, and you'll receive an email from me next Sunday. So it's once a week. I try to keep it short and sweet, add some humor in there. I try to cut through the fluff and just cover the most important stuff. And if you didn't get the Earl, you can just visit my Twitter page, and it's gonna be there in my links.
Let's dive in now. And the first one I want to start with is the media narratives. This story is a little older, but I think we don't. It's older in the sense that the specific story you shared was the New York Times article, and then Riot, and specifically Pierre Rochard's hilarious, absolutely hilarious dunk on the New York Times article. But unfortunately, like, these attacks aren't new. This isn't the first hit piece on Bitcoin by any stretch of the imagination, and it would be naive to say this will be the last. Like, you have Elizabeth Warren creating her anti-crypto army, rah rah rah, whatever that's supposed to be. Um, so let me ask you this: of all of the dumb, and I say dumb in the meanest way possible, but of all the dumb mainstream media takes on Bitcoin, which one is the one that just pisses you off?
There's so many. I have to choose one. I would
You can
say
give
that
me a handful.
the dumbest one is probably, and this is not something I've written about, but it's the divisibility of Bitcoin, that it's not scarce because you're divided. And this is just, yeah, you have to be a special kind of stupid to not comprehend, uh, you know, how it works. But also, of course, like the likes of New York Times like to write how polluting Bitcoin is, and they still rely on extremely old, research paper, that Cambridge research, and it's just, yeah. At this point, I'm not. I assume that they're just, there's malice, and they're not even trying to look for the truth. Just even in the New York Times, the the picture that they used for the article, they used like a really misty picture that would make it seem that it's like the air is really dirty, whereas, like, they could have totally avoided that, but they are definitely trying to, you know draw a narrative around Bitcoin that suits them. And the only question right now to ask is, who's funding them? Who, like, where are they getting the money? Who wants
Well,
to paint Bitcoin in this light?
my favorite line from that section of your newsletter when you bring it up, because you're absolutely right. You point out that, hey, like, this isn't what this actual image looks like. This image is photoshopped. It's doctored. It's made to look like they're polluting more, which is why Pierre Rochard like took to the actual freaking Bitcoin mining center to measure the CO2 to show, hey, this is literally fake news. Like, this is the definition of they have created a fake story. And you pose such an excellent question of, like, who is backing this? Who is funding you? Because that's where your incentive lies. Whoever is funding this is specifically asking for these type of stories. But my favorite line from this section was actually, the New York Times, the one that told you that the computer wouldn't be a thing, and all of the other technologies that they had written about as, oh, this isn't going to be important or a thing. And at a certain point, you have to kind of be like, okay, like, we have historically doubted new technologies as they arise. And this idea that, yeah, but this time is different. This time we know better. I think that is more naive than oh, yeah, Bitcoin is going to be, has the potential. I'll leave it at that. It has the potential to be the global reserve currency.
Yeah, it's like, we went down the rabbit hole because we are curious people and we're trying to find out the truth. And at this point, the journalists are not, they're not interested one bit in the truth. And it's a good question, who's funding them? I don't know. There's probably multiple parties, but they also know the general sentiment around Bitcoin, and they know that if they bash Bitcoin, they will get clicks. And they know that mainstream media is a dying business model, with the rise of Substack, podcasting, independent media. They know they're dying, and they're just holding on to the last piece. And I just have my popcorn ready. I'm watching them die, and it's funny listening to them screech and do. They can't do anything about it, and a simple beam from Pierre just totally ratioed them. Um, they know they're losing, and yeah, they're losing.
So I guess my final question on this topic is, while you and I can see through this lie, while people who are willing to think critically, who are willing to, hey, let me, like, is this real or what's going on? Like, and they ask those types of questions, they may see through the bullshit, excuse my language, but the average person doesn't. The average person sees, hey, the New York Times said this. What is, as Bitcoiners, like, what is our job or duty in combating this type of FUD?
Yeah, well, I mean, we have to make memes. We have to ridicule them, just like Pierre did, and we just have to point out how ridiculous they are. And it's a constant struggle. There's some great work written about this topic, but it's just a never-ending battle. I don't think you can solve misinformation. Like Twitter is trying to do it with the community notes, which is sometimes results in pretty hilarious outcomes. But I think it's just something you have to fight. People will always say dumb shit, and you just have to be there, ready to counter it. And that's why, for example, Relay, like our number one focus is educating people in a balanced way about Bitcoin, environmental impact, and all these things. And I think it's just there's no one solution. We just have to keep educating people. We're motivated because we know, I mean, at least we believe that the truth is on our side, and we just got to keep grinding and educating people. I think there's no silver bullet to misinformation. I don't think we should ban free speech. That's not what I'm saying. I think it's like it will keep going forever. The war between narratives.
No, absolutely. And I think, candidly, if any Bitcoiner sits there and is like, oh, we have to, people who tell lies, like they shouldn't be able to, they shouldn't be given platforms. Like, no, that is the antithesis of freedom, in my opinion. And this idea
Yeah.
that, oh, they have an idea, whether it's a lie or an honest idea that we disagree with, there should be a space for these different opinions to be shared and discussed. Because if there is that space, there is the opportunity, to your point, to educate these people and help them see through the lies. I'm going to shamelessly plug Robert Kennedy Jr., who yesterday, in a tweet he sent out discussing Bitcoin, one of his supporters discussed how, yeah, but Bitcoin's so bad for the environment. Like, I'm like, you lost the plot. And then his response was genuinely, that's actually a misconception, and I will address it very soon. So having these type of potential leaders of a country like the United States is so important, because then his narrative, like, what I really want to see, selfishly, I want Elizabeth Warren to run for president, and I want Robert Kennedy Jr. to be invited to the debate, and I want the topic of Bitcoin to be discussed on the debate stage, so that Robert Kennedy Jr. can put to bed all of the lies that Elizabeth Warren has been saying about Bitcoin specifically. Fine, go ban other cryptos. Probably not the right narrative to push as a Bitcoiner, and I know that that's wrong, because whatever they do against crypto, they will do against us. But RFK gets it. And I would love on a national stage for him to put Elizabeth Warren in her place.
Yeah, I think we're a bit early. I think, yeah, but also I want to say something about the wider media space. I think it's important that, because this mainstream media organizations, they know they're dying, so that's why they're being clickbaity. I think it's good that if in the future we can see more independent media outlets that throw out ideas and narratives on the what do you call it, battlefield of ideas, and so then we can see which one makes the most sense. And I think, yeah, it's hard to trust media nowadays. And once you go down in a rabbit hole and you become the expert, quote unquote, and you see the quality of reporting on the topic where you actually know something about, then you start asking yourself, what else are they wrong about? If they report on pharma, it's like it's probably equally shitty reporting, because if you start questioning every narrative that comes out of mainstream media. And yes, I would also love to see Warren get destroyed by a Bitcoiner on a national stage. I would pay money to see
Uh,
that.
oh man, you and me, we're gonna fly out to that debate and we're gonna get front row seats. There's
Definitely.
something really, really important in what you just said, and it's this. It's the fact that there are, in my opinion, there's a good contingent of Bitcoiners who will, hey, like, oh, this person is lying about this, or they're saying something wrong about that. But then the second they say something they agree with, and the example I'm going to use isn't a media example, it's Ted Cruz. I love picking on politicians because I hate all of our politicians here in America. But Ted Cruz is actually a moron. And when Bitcoiners go, yeah, but like, he's pro Bitcoin, so I trust him. I literally am like, really? So he just says one thing that you agree with, and then I'll forget all the other stupid things he's ever done or said. Like it's a little bit backwards in my mind, and it goes back to the point you're making. Like
Yeah,
if they've lied about this stuff, you have to start questioning all of the other things that they have lied to you about, and even the things that you agree with. You have to question it. You have to don't trust, validate. Like it is as famous as saying in the Bitcoin community as hodl on.
that's true. But at the end of the day, Bitcoiners are also humans, and we're fallible. There's such a thing as confirmation bias. Even if it's like if Elizabeth Warren started suddenly shilling Bitcoin, there would be people simping over her. Bitcoiners, people you and me both know from Bitcoin Twitter, they will be all over her because she is supporting their narrative and also indirectly pumping their bags. So it's really hard to navigate all this bullshit. There's so many ideas, and yeah, man, it's tricky. And with yeah, the simping over politicians, I also don't get it, because Ted Cruz, he's trying to appeal to Bitcoiners. He wants to make it part of his platform, just like Elizabeth Warren is trying to make the anti-crypto army thing her platform. That's what she's chosen, and she's trying to get elected. And yeah, Ted Cruz, he knows exactly what he's doing. Best politicians are the best marketers.
Yeah,
He's
I
fishing for
mean,
votes.
all I was thinking when you were talking about all of the Bitcoiners who'll simp over Elizabeth Warren the second she starts saying pro Bitcoin stuff, I'm like, well, yeah, because half of them are just virgins online.
Yes,
uh,
and
uh,
also if it pumps their bags, they'll do everything.
oh, absolutely. I mean, we don't need to get into the pumping of the bags. I'm gonna shift our order a little bit, and I want to actually, because we're talking, because I can't stop talking about politics. I want to talk about the money printing first, and then we can go over to the BRICS stuff. You brought up, and I want to pull up this quote because my goodness, I cannot believe they said the quiet part out loud. But you brought up how I'm going to butcher his name. So, any of our British listeners and followers, I apologize. But Hu Pill from the Bank of England revealed their new official stance on record, saying that Britons just need to accept that you are getting poorer, i.e., have fun staying poor. To once again just steal the words that you wrote. He literally said the quiet part out loud.
He
Look,
he told he told people that they should have fun staying poor. We thought that was a Bitcoiner line, but apparently central banks are also using it. I think his name is pronounced Hugh. Could be wrong
Hugh.
though. But yeah, he definitely said the quiet part out loud, and it's really ironic considering that it's people like him that are in charge of monetary policy, and it's like it's just it's so dense. saying things like that when you're yourself so disconnected from reality, living in your, well, he doesn't have a mansion, but it's like, I don't remember how much his house
One
cost. I said it in the,
1.5 million pounds, which is
yeah,
a very significant house.
yeah. So he's definitely not the average, Briton. Um, and also he gets like a 150K salary. So it's just, yeah,
180K.
it's yeah, 180K. It's just so, yeah. I mean, I thought it was fake news at first because it's like, no way, a representative of a central bank can actually say that out loud, even though they, that's what they probably think. But no, it was actually real. And this is just, this is exactly why we need Bitcoin. So these bureaucrats, nobody elected Hugh to be in charge of their monetary policy. You don't get a say in how much money gets printed and what's the interest rate. You don't get say in anything, but it directly affects you, and even more than Hugh, because most of us, we save in cash. You know, not everybody's a Hugh. Not everybody has a, 500,000 house somewhere. So that's why it's just really, they're just so out of touch. But at this point, they're not afraid to, they're openly, ridiculing people.
Well, what's honestly frustrating for me is this actually isn't the first politician who is unelected in charge of monetary policy who has made a similar comment. And I'm spacing on her name now, but it's the Fed chair from San Francisco who about 6 months ago, actually more than that, made an identical comment where she said that, yeah, but my family's not dealing with inflation because you get a nice salary and you have like these advantages that the everyday citizen who is going to the grocery store and paying six, seven, $8 for a dozen eggs all of a sudden, they're feeling that. But to your point, these politicians are so disconnected because they have these bloated salaries that you and I are funding. Like all of these people in public
Yeah,
service get a
taxpayer
salary from
money.
exactly, exactly. So to have the audacity to say, yeah, but it's not a problem for me, so it shouldn't be a problem for you. Um, Let me be perfectly clear. Meet me inside an octagon, and I'll beat some fucking sense into you. Um, it's laughable to say the least. And one of the things, and this is just American ignorance more than anything, but I appreciated the fact that in this segment you also wrote, by the way, 1 in every 4 pounds in existence have been printed in just the last 3 years. And then the question that you posed very simply, but that's not why we're dealing with inflation, right? And in America, since 2007, it's like 80% of our dollars in circulation have been printed since the 2007 financial crisis. So this transitory inflation promise that was given to us that is now turned into sticky inflation, it's laughable. And this is where it frustrates me the most because to bring up that point of these are unelected politicians who have made wrong decisions or gotten things incorrect and there's no accountability. And like
Um, I
I'm
think it's
ranting,
a
so I need to
feature.
stop.
Yeah, no, no problem. I think, I mean, that's a feature, not a bug. That's how it works. The fiat system. I'm sure you're aware with the the cantillionaire effect. I guess I should say cantillionaire in French. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, but yeah, that's just these people who are in charge. They have assets that appreciate with inflation, and but that's not the case for your average Joe. And I remember there's just an anecdote. In Finland where I grew up. Like they asked an average politician how much a carton of milk costs, and no, they were all way off. None of them knew, like they were like way off. And it's just, it's, but I think that's just a feature of democracy. Probably, maybe it's an unpopular opinion, but most politicians are really disconnected from, your average Joe. And yeah, and I think inflation, the sticky inflation that you mentioned, that's also just inherent to the fiat monetary system, and then they try to blame inflation on Russia. It's the price of eggs is going up because of Putin, obviously, or
Putin's
greedy
war.
corporations. But yeah, yeah. Well, you're gonna get canceled if you say war. It's a special operation. Uh, but yeah, they blame everybody except themselves. But if you just look at the amount of money printing, and I say money printing, of course they don't literally print money. I'm talking about the expansion of M2 money supply. Like 25% of it was in the US, was created. Sorry, actually 33% was created in the last 3 years, and these are all the stimmy checks that you guys got, and obviously I'm sure you bought Bitcoin with them, but this is
I
what's
did.
causing inflation.
I
Of
bought a
course you
lot of
did.
Bitcoin with my stimmy checks. But I
We
will.
don't get
I will.
we don't get stimmy checks here.
No, but you
I'm
get free
salty.
healthcare.
Well, again, it's not really free. It's
True.
subsidized.
True. True. But
But
I
we don't want to
digress.
get into that.
I wanna focus more on this, the incessant, as you put it so eloquently, the expansion of the M2 money supply, because it it reminds me of like a little kid who will like push a push a glass vase off of a table and it breaks and shatters, and like, why did that happen? Like, who did that? Like,
I don't know.
I didn't break it. Like, it must have been the wind, right? Well, the
Yeah,
floor was too hard. Um,
yeah.
and look, we're two plebs talking. This is not by any means some political experts dissecting how to solve the global monetary crisis by any stretch of the imagination. But entertain me for a moment here, and for whatever reason, you and I have the opportunity to right these wrongs. Like, how would you go about, or what would you like to see done to try and correct some of these mistakes that have happened?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't want to be in the situation that I would have this power to do it. I don't think anybody in the first place should have the power to, I mean, to have so much power over monetary policy. And I'm saying monetary policy, but essentially it's people's lives, because saving money is essentially what makes us human. If humans couldn't save money, we wouldn't have all the nice things that we have here. If we just spent everything in the moment, like Venezuelans and Argentinians do, we wouldn't have anything. If our time preference would be zero, we just spend it everything. So like the first thing is that I think nobody should have the power in the first place to play God in a complex system that is economy. There's so many moving variables, so many first, third, second world effects that you cannot, you know, um, foresee. And I think nobody should be in this power. But do you mean that I would be in like sitting in a central
Whatever
bank?
decision
And
you make gets installed.
it depends. I could make the world burn. I could hike up interest rates and see the fiat world crumble, and then we get to see our Bitcoin backs pump. But I wouldn't want to do that. So yeah, I mean, at this point, it's one of those things that you cannot stop the money printing. The show must go on. If you contract the economy, which is what Fed and some other central banks have been attempting to do, it sucks liquidity from the system, and then there's all these banks that we've seen go bust, they're, it's all a very incestuous system. And at this point, I wouldn't stop the money printing because it would just crash the whole system. It's they don't have an option. There is no way out. If you stop the money printing, the house of cards collapses. And that's what some Bitcoiners want, but also that would destroy so many lives. And we sometimes look at numbers where but we forget that these are human lives we're talking about. And with things getting more expensive, you can directly correlate it to something like the number of suicides that happen. And that's what central bankers, they play gods and they forget the human aspect. But this is not something there. I don't believe central bankers are evil. It's just the nature of the game. You have to play by the rules, and the rules, basically the game is rigged from the get-go. So I wouldn't change anything because that's just how the system is designed. I would do what I do now, which is keep building an alternative system on the side, so then we can transition more peacefully.
So I think that segues perfectly to us discussing an alternative system that is literally being built as we speak. And I'm talking about the BRICS bucks. I'm talking about what I'm calling it the Bancor. Shout out anyone who's read the Mandibles. Um, Arsen, do you mind just walk us through what's happening with the BRICS nations for a second?
So, as you know, the US dollar is the global reserve currency. And if you want to do any kind of oil trade, for example, you have to denominate it in USD, but also other kind of trades, because, dollar is still very trusted. So nations use it for trade. And basically people are starting to realize that dollar, you can be cut off from the dollar, which is what happened to Russia. So Russia had lots of US dollars at the central banks in the West and the US. And basically they got cut off after they invaded Ukraine. And then other nations started looking at this and realizing that actually, if US doesn't like us, and there's a few countries that US doesn't like, you just, and if you end up on this blacklist like Russia, Iran, few other countries, you can be immediately cut off and your dollars will be seized. So that's why, like, BRICS is basically, it's the acronym for five largest emerging economies, which is, help me out here, Russia, Brazil, China, South Africa, and also something else. India. And they are trying to, it's not like, it's kind of like a loosely defined economic alliance. It's like G7. There's no concrete rules on, what they do together in terms of economic activity, but it's like a counterbalance to G7, which is the Western equivalent. And actually, there's about 20 countries who want to join BRICS because they want to diversify from the dollar, because they're realizing that the dollar is weakening, and by joining BRICS, it keeps weakening. So it's kind of like a game theory situation. Countries are joining BRICS, and BRICS is also developing. I mean, this is not confirmed, but apparently they're developing BRICbucks, as you mentioned. So it's essentially legacy cuckbucks versus BRICbucks. And I think this is a good development because, I mean, just like with decentralization of media, there should be many small media organizations. I think having BRICS as a counterbalance to USD and the USD hegemony, it's it it puts some pressure on USD to sort of rethink their position And because basically when US prints money, they offload these inflations to every other nation that trades, either operates directly in USD, like something like El Salvador, or also trades in USD. But the inflation is not the main cause why people are flocking to BRICS, why nations are flocking to BRICS. It's basically they're afraid to get cancelled. You know, you say one wrong thing, and the dollars get seized, and it's significant because the BRICS, they're none of them by themselves are bigger than US, except for maybe China in terms of economic activity, but together they make up third of the world GDP, which is already more than G7. So it's definitely a serious contendant, and I think that's like that's part of a bigger trend of de-dollarization. People are realizing that dollar is actually a shitcoin, and I mean, because it's inherently, frankly, it's an experiment. It's a monetary experiment, pure fiat money, and that's why the BRICS kind of has that's why nations are starting to look at alternative systems. Unfortunately, not yet Bitcoin, but something outside the USD. But of course, BRICS will have the same constraints as USD. It's centralized, and you have to trust the issuers, and you can also be cut off from that system.
It's that last point for me that while this may be a solution for the countries involved with the BRICS Bancorp, BRICS Bucks, or whatever they're going to end up calling it, it inevitably will have the same potential to fail as the dollar, simply because you've taken one centralized entity and just replaced it with another. And sure, the argument is, well, there's multiple countries involved in this. Um, I think this is far more dangerous for the U.S. and the dollar than at least the U.S. media wants us to believe. We hear this rhetoric a lot right now of, I think the latest story around the dollar here stateside has been, oh, we're going to run out of dollars in June. Like Janet Yellen is going around saying that. You're having a lot of different mainstream media publications running with this story as well. But you're not hearing this conversation around, oh, there is a legitimate challenge to the US dollar on global trade. And sure, in America, everyone uses the dollar. You're not using anything else. You might find a couple of vendors who will accept Bitcoin, but at its core, you're using the dollar here. But outside, like in Europe, you're not using the dollar, you're using the euro. You go to the Middle East, and for most Middle Eastern countries have their version of a real. You go to South America, and most countries in South America have their version of the peso. So outside of the US, there are two main functions for the dollar: settle international trade, which we've discussed, and then buying our treasury bonds. But what scares me, quite frankly, as a US citizen who has far too much wealth in dollars or dollar denominated goods, at least, we are watching the one use case of using the dollar to settle international trade that is diminishing in real time, slowly and steadily, and then all of a sudden it will happen like that. You alluded to in the article how, hey, Saudi Arabia has requested to join BRICS, and they're not the only country. BRICS is not just the 5 countries we listed. There are a handful of others, but to make the acronym nice, they just left it at those 5 letters. If you have, which Saudi Arabia has already agreed with China to settle trade in the yuan, I saw yesterday or a couple of days ago, China has settled more trade now in the yuan than in the dollar for the first time ever since international trade was becoming as prominent as it has become. Like, you are deteriorating one aspect of it, and it will happen. whether people want to believe it or not, but eventually the day will come where we are so underwater, we as in the United States are so underwater in our debt that either we will default, which I don't think will happen, on our treasuries and our debts, or what is more likely, they will just print ad nauseum to settle their debts. But at that point, everyone who's held dollar debts is sitting there going, all right, well, this is worthless. So I need to put this money in something else. So watching this diminish in real time, as an American, it concerns me. I'm curious, as someone who's not an American, who doesn't necessarily deal with the dollar on a regular basis, like, what does it excite you? Does it concern you? Where is your emotional sort of gauge on this?
Well, I'm not concerned because I'm all in Bitcoin. So, that's one thing. But definitely, if you're, I mean, you mentioned that Yellen doesn't go around speaking about this issue. I can assure you, sure as hell, they're talking about it behind closed doors. And as you said,
Absolutely.
the biggest use cases for dollar is the treasuries. They're monetizing their debt, and then global trade. But they're interconnected. If US dollars loses, the status as the currency for global trade, treasuries also become less enticing to foreign nations. And I think everything the US has reached, you guys are the richest nation in the world, is because of this dollar hegemony. And of course, it has some negatives too, like you lose some industries disappear from the US and they get exported to China. But like, if you lose this status, if you don't reinvent yourself, there's going to be a decline in the standard of living. That's why it is worrying, even though we are still pretty far away from that kind of scenario. In my opinion, USD is still the biggest chad of all the currencies, and it's not going anywhere quite yet.
Mhm.
But it's definitely, we're starting to see the first signs of de-dollarization. And me personally, um yeah, as I said, I'm all in Bitcoin. And as a European, I know euro is even a bigger shitcoin than US dollar. We don't even have the status of global reserve currency. And I mean, the whole European Union is just kind of like, it's not really working out for most of
That
the
that's the
nations.
that's the most politically correct way to say that. You can curse on this
Is
show. I said it so it's not safe for children.
it's a shit show, to be honest. But it's still early. That's why we should not fearmonger too much. But it's definitely something to keep an eye out, and it's good to have a counterbalance to US. I mean, speaking from a global point of view, if you have a US centric view, yeah, you probably want the US to to remain a dominant player in the geopolitical scene. But I think the bigger theme here is that Bitcoin doesn't have any of these problems that decentralized currencies have. And it's just, you know, TikTok next block. It's there. It's always there when you need it. Even if it is volatile and the merchants don't really accept it, it's always going to be there once you get, you know, if you once you get canceled by the US, or if the BRICS nations don't like you because you're friendly with the US, you can always go back to US dollar. Sorry, the you can always go back to Bitcoin.
Right. I mean, I definitely like unfortunately in the United States, at least where I how I live my day-to-day life, most of my life requires me to transact in dollars. Um, I look forward to the day where that changes outright. Um, I do think though that the significance of this, it is very early, and we probably don't feel the effects of it for for maybe a decade or two, and it will take some time. And I've long believed that while Bitcoin is inevitable, there are going to be, there may just be one step, or there may be multiple steps until we get to that inevitable cycle where right now what is happening is the BRICS, the countries involved with this BRICS bucks think that they can outsmart the US. They think that they know better. And the inevitable truth that you, myself, and every Bitcoiner knows is that no, nobody knows best. In fact, you're all corrupt. And if you were given the chance, you will tilt the scale in your favor. And Bitcoin is the only option that prevents that from happening. So I guess my question is, does something like the BRICS nations going off to create this joint currency, does this help or hinder global Bitcoin adoption in your opinion?
Yeah, honestly, I don't know, but I think in the existing situation, it's good to have alternatives, and I think ultimately it does help because the essentially the BRICS buck would not be any different from the USD. You know, it still have the inbuilt features, aka inflation and the censorship, and people are slowly waking up, and the trust in these traditional currencies and institutions is slowly eroding, even though normal people, at Thanksgiving table don't really talk about it, but it's in the air. The banks are collapsing, your money is worth less. Ultimately, people know that there's something wrong with fiat money, even if they can't they can't really describe it in words. And I think time is on our side, and I think Bitcoiners just need to be patient and be humble and just keep stacking sats.
Have you read The Mandibles?
I've heard about it maybe 1,000 times, but I haven't read it yet.
You must. You must, because this scenario that is literally transpiring is like straight from this book. And what blows my mind about it is the US's response right now is the exact response that they give in the book, which is more or less to ignore it, to act as though it's nothing, when in fact, like, this will be the detriment, and this will be, I genuinely believe this will be what breaks the back of the US dollar. And you alluded to something very important that we haven't even discussed this, which is the fact that the BRICS nations GDP for the first time ever has surpassed the GDP of the G7 nations. Why is this significant? In my opinion, it's because you have more of the global production coming from these countries than you do from the countries that have historically been producing so much for the world. And let's be very blunt and clear about this. The reason the G7 countries have been afforded their ability to just wave their big dicks around and dictate to everyone else, you need to do this, you need to do that, and this is how we do things, is because they contributed so much to the world. Now, it's only like slightly above. I think in your article you were like, it's they have 31% of global GDP and the G7 is 30. So it's not like, oh, it's a wide margin. It is close. However, as this margin starts to spread, the weight of the G7 countries and what they want to do and say will diminish, and other nations will have no choice but to listen to the asks, wants, and needs of these BRICS countries. I don't know if you have any additional thoughts on that. I need to mute myself so my dog stops barking in the background.
Yeah, well, Balaji, he talks about ascending and descending nations. And I think that's definitely what the BRICS nations are. You cannot call them third world countries. These countries are hungry. and they will, they're coming for the US dollar. They are, the G7 have enjoyed this long-term dominance and seigniorage that they've grown complacent. And I don't think that it's like the BRICS that will kind of end the dollar hegemony. I think the dollar will do it I think the dollar will destroy itself just fine by itself, just by continuing to exist. And yeah, I mean, something like India, like this is going to be a global superpower. I don't know about China because, of the, how authoritarian it is there. And, but like something like China, something like India, like these guys are smart and hungry and educated. And yeah, I don't claim to know what's going to happen. I mean, I would prefer that there is no superpower that, has so much control like the US now. I would prefer to have, more smaller nations that then hopefully can somehow incorporate Bitcoin into their nation state strategy. I don't know how that looks. I don't know if it's naive of me to think that nations can use Bitcoin right now, definitely as a way to circumvent sanctions, for example. But like when Bitcoin is big, I don't know how. I don't know how you can combine the concept of state, or at least a big state, plus Bitcoin, because Bitcoin directly undermines the power of big state. And I know I went on a tangent there. Sorry, it just came to
Don't say
mind.
sorry. Don't say, it was beautiful. I loved it. It reminds me of one of my favorite quotes of like all the government is just a corporation and their income is just the tax dollars they collect off of us. But to your point, they can really only do that because they also issue the currency that they are then collecting. If they are no longer issuing the currency, it becomes very difficult for them to have the powers that they have. And they have to think and operate in a vastly different way. And I think a lot of this, though, stems from the fiat system that's really entrenched itself over the last 100+ years. This wasn't really the case when you had gold-backed currencies. I'm gonna try to see. Yep, I did it. All right. And the Bitcoin Standard, Safe talks about how World War One was,
What's that? Oh yeah, the
yeah,
Bible.
the Bible, the Bitcoin Bible, right here. Um, he talks about how in World War One, all the countries essentially they were operating on a gold standard, but they decided to pause the gold standard so they can, keep the war going. And then they all agreed, when it's done, we'll revert back. But unfortunately for them, what they didn't realize is they had bit off way too much and they were not able to revert back, which unfortunately led to hyperinflation in Germany due to a lot of the fines that they installed on the country. None of the country's economies were really recovering well. There's a reason why the Great Depression happens after World War One. And then all of a sudden, it leads to World War II, where this started to turn into one of the first almost forever wars because it was just incessant money printing. Fast forward 80 years, and we're fighting wars over decades now, and it's almost blasphemous because of this idea that they can just these the government corporation that exists is able to do as they see fit because they can just endlessly print and endlessly fund these sick and disgusting endeavors on the basis of this is right for us, freedom, blah blah blah. I went on a tangent now, so I'm gonna stop talking.
Yeah, I definitely agree that the governments are corporation. In the future, they're going to be more like startups, like more lean. you know, Not have that big budgets.
I
I mean,
really hope they'll
governments
also
have
have younger
unlimited
employees.
budgets.
I'm hoping your
Yeah, younger.
startup
Yeah,
analogy.
yeah. I hope it works out. But I like what you said about the US going off the gold standard, I don't even think that they were thinking that, okay, we can do this and then we get back on gold standard. And I think they just had to do it in the moment because it was convenient. And I mean, it's a great tool. If you are in power, printing your money is a superpower, essentially. Like, of course you're gonna do it. And we're not better than these people, you know. I'm sure I'd be corrupted if I was a central banker, because you know fiat money corrupts you because because you can, if you can, you're gonna do it. But the beauty with Bitcoin is that you cannot be corrupted because you cannot influence. You're just a one node, the sea of nodes. You cannot influence the monetary system, and I think that's just the feature of you know how the political structure and democracy is structured, is that politicians and presidents have short-term thinking. They don't really think about what's the economy going to look like in 20 years. They just want to get through this 4 years, you know, the election cycle. They just want to get through this war. They just want to get through the next years. And um, it's just this short-term thinking, because they're not going to be, they know that they're not going to be in the office for 20 years, unless they're Putin. I don't know if being in office 20 years is any better, but that's just like something that's in here inherent to the political and monetary system that we currently have.
I mean, to your point, like I talk about it a lot, at least from
We
the
just have to wait and see what becomes of it.
no, absolutely. Um, to really hammer one of the details that you said too, and I discussed this a lot. You know, American politicians in particular, they're more accustomed to, let me do the bare minimum, let me not rock the boat, so I can continue to be reelected. Because, fun fact, you can spend your entire life in Congress like Nancy Pelosi has, like um, Dianne Feinstein has for the state of California. Like, there's no term limit for these Congress people. So they're able to make policies forever. The only political position with term limits is the president of the United States. And it baffles me because the president doesn't really have that much influence, sway, or power. It's his cabinet that makes a lot of these decisions. And then Congress and the Supreme Court that sort of upholds these decisions. But those two branches can stay in power as long as they see fit. And most of them, like, I saw a picture of Nancy Pelosi when her career first started. Do you know who the president of the United States was when she first started her political career?
I'm trying to calculate now. Was it Jimmy Carter?
You got to go back more, man.
I don't know all the presidents.
JFK.
JFK. Oh shit, she's old.
She's
aged
old.
Must be all that money she's making.
Dude, I mean, look, there's a reason why these politicians, they got the plug. They've got the plug, to say the least. I'm gonna move us though, unless there's anything else you wanted to talk about on the BRICS. I wanted to skip one of the topics and we're just gonna go straight to nation state adoption, if that's cool.
Yep, let's do it.
So Samson Mao, previous guest on this podcast, friend of the show. In case you don't know, in case you live under a rock, Samson Mao and JN3, what do they do? Their job is to help nation states understand and properly implement and adopt Bitcoin into their day-to-day lives. Instrumental in helping El Salvador really grow its Bitcoin presence. And he has been meeting with countless politicians from numerous countries to help other countries see, understand, and really incorporate what El Salvador has done for their own countries. Most recently, and I'm going to butcher her name, so I'm going to hand it off to you for the Mexican senator that he was pictured with, and the caption of it was simply probably nothing. It's like Adriana Campos, I think. Is that right?
The connection is a bit choppy, so I might have missed something. But yeah, her name is
Indira
Indira
Kempis.
Kempis.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. What was the question? Because I think it was a bit choppy, the connection.
No, essentially what I wanted to discuss is I guess actually the only question was, can you just say her name? Because I couldn't remember it off the top of my head.
I'm probably butchering it too.
No, you're good. You're good. The real question of this is, and I'll be perfectly blunt. We were maybe as Bitcoiners hoping to see other countries follow El Salvador's footsteps, and we're coming up on 2 years since the announcement at Bitcoin 2021. And the countries that have adopted, and I say adopted very loosely, um, like I've never heard of these countries, and I don't believe most citizens have. And so a country like Mexico, though, having very serious conversations around Bitcoin with one of their wealthiest individuals in Ricardo Salinas being a full-blown Bitcoiner, this would, in my opinion, be a way bigger domino to fall if Mexico, it does not need to go balls to the walls and buy Bitcoin in their treasury and make it a currency. It doesn't need to do all that. It just needs to take one move, in my opinion, at least. I would love to hear from you if what would be the step Mexico could take that would be most exciting to you?
Well, yeah, as you said, adopting Bitcoin kind of can mean a lot of things. So it can be either putting on the treasury, it could be using it as legal tender, could be something like issuing some kind of Bitcoin bond, like what El Salvador did with their volcanoes, or it could mean that using it in global trade. I think what would be the most exciting to me, the thing is, Mexico could do this. It could do the same thing as El Salvador and just make it legal tender. But I think we've seen how that goes. People are skeptical, and the shit takes a long time for people to start using this new weird money. And I just don't like forcing people to use money that they don't like. That just kind of goes against my personal values. Um, and I think it wouldn't be effective, trying to force people to use Bitcoin in their daily lives. I think this should come organically. To me, what would be most exciting would be definitely putting Bitcoin on the treasury, and then also maybe issuing some kind of bonds so that the countries can somehow fund themselves with Bitcoin appreciation. But also just having it on treasury is just such a strong signal to other countries. It doesn't disrupt anything in the country. It's like a low risk bet, but it's such a strong signal to other smaller developing, or should I say, um, ascending countries, that this is an option. You don't have to hold US dollars, you don't have to import US inflation. There's coin, and it has obviously it has its problems. It's volatile, but having it on treasury would be like the low hanging fruit, in my opinion. Even though it doesn't
Especially,
sound sexy, it doesn't sound sexy. Legal tender, it's nothing like that, but that would be sort of the smart thing to do, in my opinion.
I mean, I'm not saying we're timing the market or anything, but doing it before the halving is probably a good idea. Just saying. Just
Priced
just
in.
just
Yeah,
the
probably. I don't
I
know.
may have to have you come back so we have that discussion.
Yeah, I don't
Um,
know if I have a strong opinion about that.
fair, fair. I mean, look, if Mexico were to turn around tomorrow and say they're gonna make Bitcoin legal tender, like I'm moving to Mexico tomorrow. Like it's not even a hesitation in my mind. I already know what city in Mexico I'm going to live in. I'm not going to tell any of you fuckers. You'll never be able to find me again. It's over. I win. Leave me the fuck alone. Um, but I think to your point, like just put a little bit on your treasury, and that is the simplest, easiest way. And it's that old saying too that we talk about. It's like just buy a little bit, get a little skin in the game, and then you learn a little bit more, and then you recognize. And I say this because I am an Iranian citizen and I am Iranian, but Iran has actually taken a lot of steps to use and implement Bitcoin in ways that we may not be recognizing because they don't care to publicize it, but they very quietly have been starting to settle international trade, some with some trade partners in a cryptocurrency. And then my old co-host and I, we kind of did the calculations. We're like, there's no other cryptocurrency that has enough liquidity for them to have completed that level of a trade that they said they completed with crypto. So it has to be Bitcoin. And to your point, it takes one thing. And this is why, like that saying of Bitcoin fixes everything, and you can laugh and mock it, or you can realize there's a reason why a country like Iran looks at Bitcoin as a way for them to settle international trade because they're left out of the US dollar system. There's a reason why a country like El Salvador, without their own currency, is looking at Bitcoin like, let's make this legal tender, let's make this our currency. These are two completely separate use cases of the same technology. And so, as more countries are sort of pushed with their back against the wall, there are so many use cases for Bitcoin, and the opportunity is there. It just, in my opinion, takes people like us, people like Samson Mao, to help them see and recognize, hey, this is a problem you're dealing with, and this is how Bitcoin actually can help you solve that problem. I'd love to hear this. This ended up being a far more serious conversation, so I feel like I do need to ask like a lighthearted, fun question. So, where, what country or region would you like to see adopt Bitcoin next?
Which country I would like to see adopt Bitcoin? I don't know if I have a preference, but I think it's going to be one of those, smaller kind of rogue states that kind of have nothing to lose from, that are not too connected to the US, but sort of that have use cases for it. I can't really say which country. It's probably going to be a small country, but I think it's gonna take time, honestly, man. It's like with us, the learning curve is so steep, and just like you and me, we had our own journey. Nation states, they also need to have their own journey, and that's why the work Samson is doing is important. You can't go balls into Bitcoin. You need to start small, have small exposure, start doing few trades here and there. It's gonna take a long time, and I think countries are already there's some countries who already, like you said, Iran, doing it in secret. And just recently, I think I saw an article where the nation of Bhutan, which is a small country in Southeast Asia, that they've been mining Bitcoin for a while already, and this is not something they want to publicize because it doesn't really, it's not like a PR play like El Salvador, but it's more of like we have a need for Bitcoin, and that's why we're mining it. And same with Russia. They are looking into, Russia is looking into Bitcoin mining to circumvent sanctions. Mexico is looking into Bitcoin to, well, I don't know the specific reasons why, but most of the population is unbanked, so it would make total sense for them to start dabbling with Bitcoin and offer more economic opportunities to their citizens. But to answer your question, I don't know which country, and frankly, I don't care. It's just one of those things that's just going to happen. But I think it's going to be a small nation, like some insignificant nation, like it's a small island in the middle of nowhere.
I could see that. I mean, that's exactly what we got last year, and I think we will continue. I think a domino like Russia, Iran, or Mexico falling would make such a big wave that it couldn't be ignored. But I think we're a little bit away from a big move by a big country like that. And that's why I think something like this BRICS bucks that we talked about earlier, that is probably the next logical step for some of these countries before the inevitable step of Bitcoin. Um, Arsen, this has been honestly a very deep, serious conversation, and I need to make it lighthearted because this is, after all, a late night show.
Let's do it.
Have you ever shitcoined? This is a safe space. I've admit to everyone what my shitcoin de choice was back in the day.
What do you think?
I think you've never shitcoined, quite frankly. I think
I
you're
was the
pure.
biggest. I was the biggest shitcoiner ever in
Oh!
like in 2017, 18. I believed everything Vitalik said. Because I couldn't understand what he was saying. So I had to get burned properly, and that was part of my journey. I'm not hiding it. I was a big IOTA shill. Like there's the XRP army, the nano marines, those IOTA something squad brigade or something. Yeah, I was part of them, but it didn't last long. I realized that I've learned that if you cannot explain something simply, it doesn't make sense, and you don't even understand it yourself. And Bitcoiners just had this clarity in their speech. I remember listening to Seyfedin Amus in 2018, and he just explained things where it just made sense. It clicked, like from first principles. It just made sense. And Bitcoiners are very paranoid, which also resonated with me. Um, you know, they think about the whole risk model. Um, so yeah, to answer your question, I was a shitcoiner, but I've reborn. I'm pure now. I don't have any shitcoins, um, except for maybe real estate. That might be the only shitcoin I'm about to acquire because I'm buying a house.
Nothing wrong with having a place to live.
Yeah, it's acceptable.
I think sometimes I laugh at this idea of like, hey, you shouldn't buy anything other than Bitcoin. It's like, yeah, but we need water, we need food. So like, cool.
I
I'm
mean,
really proud of the few Bitcoiners who figured out how to just like not eat, drink, don't need shelter. Like, good for you, man. You figured it out.
yeah, I want my electricity. I like my rooms bright. I mean, at the end of the day, Bitcoin is, it's not it's a means to an end. It's not an end. Nobody is collecting money for the sake of it. Some people do, but that's a sickness. You don't want to do that. But eventually, we want our money to give us either physical stuff or even better, more time. So it's like, I know we had this phase in Bitcoin where it was never selling, just stacking sats. But I'm happy to see a circular economy, uh, you know, become a thing again, because it used to be a thing in the early days of Bitcoin, and then we kind of became hodlers, never spending, which also makes sense because Bitcoin is going through a monetization phase, so it might not make sense to buy the newest iPhone credit later, but also it's if you spend and replace, I think it's fine. So I'm glad to see circular economy reappear again, and it's especially like during conferences like Bitcoin conference in Miami. It's like there's so many transactions happening, and this is what makes me bullish. Um, I don't remember
Although,
your original question.
no, we're just at this point, we're just ranting and rambling. But what I'm really looking forward about the conference, which if you have not yet bought your tickets to Bitcoin Miami, use promo code QQQ, get 10% off. And I will know if you've used my promo code. I will bring you a joint and we can smoke a joint together. Um, but the thing I'm looking forward to most is not actually the fact that people are going to transact in Bitcoin. It's the fact that Bitcoin has very consistently during these conferences dumped in price during the conference and shortly after the conference. So looking forward to those cheap sats.
Do you think it's because, I mean, the Bitcoin market is pretty liquid, so I don't think so, but do you think it has something to do with people spending so much Bitcoin and these merchants pretty much selling this Bitcoin, market selling and then dumping the price?
Maybe I think honestly it's a little bit of just like all of the people who would be buying Bitcoin so regularly and often are all just at an event at the same time.
Yeah, they're not stacking.
They're not stacking. So to your point, like yeah, these vendors who may like some of them may just collect Bitcoin and then immediately dump it for fiat because they just need the fiat to operate their business. Because again, a reminder, as much as we want everyone and every business to accept Bitcoin, there is somewhere in the supply chain where that doesn't exist. So I think it's a little naive to demand that, oh, you must always hold your Bitcoin and only spend Bitcoin. It's like, yeah, but unfortunately, my vendor doesn't accept Bitcoin. So I do need to liquidate and I do need the fiat, at least in that transaction. But I digress. Arsen, I've stolen so much of your time. You have been so gracious in gifting it. I think you might be frozen. But I want to
it's
remind.
you
Okay.
that's
Haha,
frozen.
you're back. Haha.
Yeah, yeah, I'm
Let
here.
I just want to remind everyone to go on tldrbtc.com and go ahead and join this newsletter listserv because you are just going to get pure signal once a week, fun, easy to read. His meme game is on point. If you love this conversation, you're going to love the newsletter. Arsen, I will turn it over to you for the final word.
Thank you for the shill. In the newsletter, I'm probably more retarded than during this call. I tried to be professional for Q so he doesn't get cancelled. But yeah, if you like degenerate jokes, fart jokes, poop jokes, but also a few memes, but also try to plant some seeds of knowledge, It's not just, kind of like plant them in the content so people actually learn something. If you're interested, yeah, come say hi and let me know what you think of the content. I'm always looking to improve it.
Ladies and gentlemen, this has been another episode of Late Night Bitcoin. I'm so grateful that you all have tuned in, listened to me all over the world. I recently saw how many countries people are actually downloading and listening to this podcast. So thank you everyone for listening. Be sure to leave us a rating, leave us a review, tell us how much I suck, tell me what I can do better. We will be back very soon with another episode. Thank you very much.